I'm Mohana, and HR Unplugged is brought to you by Better Place exclusively for each one of you. From creating designing values to actually creating organization structures, next-gen cool policies, CHROs are playing such crucial roles across organizations. In HR Unplugged, we aspire to bring to you some of the coolest people, most courageous leaders of the industry who have actually helped shape the landscape of people through industry itself. And simply put, they're some of the most amazing people, interesting work that they have done, and hold a larger-than-life attitude. So come join me as I deep dive and have meaningful conversations with our CHROs and HR leaders and understand their thoughts and get to know them better. See you there. Hi everyone, thanks for joining HR Unplugged again. I have an amazing guest who is Manmeet Sandhu from PhonePe. Manmeet's an incredible person, has driven such great success for PhonePe as an HR leader in the organization. Let's listen to her, let's understand her views on so many different topics. She's been actually someone who's worked in multiple locations. Her views around the world are something that we can always observe. Her practices have been quite interesting in terms of just how startup in their growth phases actually make a difference to people's lives at the end of the day and create history in terms of our economy. So we don't need to wait any further. Come join me in the conversation. Hi Manmeet, good evening and a big welcome to HR Unplugged.
Great to be here, Mohana. Thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. And we've been doing a few of these episodes already, Manmeet, and it's really nice to have you. So I'm actually very, very thrilled about it. So thank you for joining us. And I remember, Manmeet, that we had connected a few years back, maybe even 5 years back when you just joined PhonePe, right? And at that time, I think we were just exploring synergies if we could actually partner and work together. So from that journey to come here, it's my absolute personal pleasure to actually be hosting you today as well.
Great, and it's great to have you here on the other side as well. Very, very happy to see the journey that you've been on.
Thank you so much. So Manmeet, I know that through this period, right, that we've known you and the industry knows you as well, we've seen that you've traveled and worked in such exciting locations at a time when actually a lot of people really were aspiring to go and work in larger companies globally, take on those kind of roles. What was that journey like? And then you come back to India and you're doing something so phenomenal to change the dynamic of the country as well, right? We all are contributing in that space. So that whole, nice circle, right? How has that experience been? What has then been that impact for you personally?
Yes, it's been, I think, quite an interesting journey for me always. Being able to engage with multiple cultures, multiple types of people, multiple ways of doing things was sort of a key aspiration. I always, as a kid, wanted to be able to see the world, see all different kinds of people, find maybe my tribe wherever that might be. And it was clear to me that my tribe is not my community necessarily that I was born into, but probably something that I'd have to find. So in that sense, getting to see what all the world has to offer was, I think, a core aspiration and definitely something that I think played out rather nicely. And in that journey, I think what you tend to forget sometimes is that, or rather my learning in all of that has been that on the one hand, people across the world are very, very different, but another way, all of us are at some fundamental level very, very similar. And I think that learning and that understanding is really where I would say my journey and my full circle has been. That people who you might have spent your entire life with and might be as similar to your life experience as possible can be wholly and completely different from you. You may have no way of really being able to connect to them. And people who may have nothing ostensibly common with you might really be your people. So keeping that openness to sort of find out who people really are and really how can you connect with them, I think is really the big thing.
That's amazing. And was it like different when you came back to India and worked here again?
I mean, yes, definitely. Because you get to see, I'll put it this way, that I understood India better when I was outside of India. And then when I came back to India, I probably again developed a different perspective on it then. So it's actually seeing three different sides of the country, of the world that I've been a part of, and then getting to understand that coming together, it's maybe building something else entirely.
And that's so true, because there were a number of years that I was actually living in Germany and then London, and then got back to India, which was a actual conscious choice. When you leave, you realize there's so many strengths, right? And the perspective of your own country also sort of evolves. So it's very, very interesting, right? But when I actually was living out, and I'd love to get your perspective on it, because you're meeting so many people, you're doing different roles which need to be done a little differently if you were to do it somewhere that you were actually used to doing it. And you actually you're a woman, you're from a certain country, you're interacting with so many people, and London for me was a melting pot, right? But I sort of sense that there could have been an element of like positive bias or a perception that you have of another person, right? What was your journey like in terms of the whole area of bias itself?
Yes, and I agree completely with you that it actually works both sides. That so I was in China for a few years, and then I was in the US for a few years, and in the US I was actually in a role that involved working with countries, quite a diverse set of countries across the world. And so it was very interesting because when people talk about bias, very frequently it's a negative piece that you remember, but it's also the fact that when I was in China as an Indian woman who was an expat through the company, I was kind of seen in a particular way, and there were a bunch of positive biases that were kind of associated with the cultural diversity of the country. People would always remember Raj Kapoor and the songs and kind of burst into song depending on what they were, age they were, and then it just built a connection, and people associated you with a particular kind of person regardless of whether you were or not. In the US again, they just assumed that you were slightly smarter when it came to engineering and math and that kind of stuff. May not be true, but it doesn't matter. You're getting that positive side effects of just being Indian. But very frequently we tend to kind of remember the negative sides, which I think is a little bit of an unfair way to kind of think about it, because really if you're saying you want to be seen as a person and not as a series of stereotypes, then it has to be all of it, and you can't just choose the bits that you like and not choose the ones that you don't particularly want.
Yeah, that's amazing, because, and you know, sometime back we were talking, right, it's not just what you're receiving, it's also what you're sort of giving back, right? And we have the ability to actually navigate through those relationships as well. And more than mostly I've just carried lots of great friends back home, you know, so that's something that I really cherish about going out and learning from those cultures as well, right? So tell me like a little bit about your journey into HR, Manmeet, where you know, most of us have had those pivotal moments or most important people who have influenced our lives, right? And we are like a collection of those sort of experiences or memories, so to say, right, of what has impacted us. So how has your journey been? Who or what has actually impacted you positively?
So the decision to get into HR was probably driven by the fact that as a child I was given to spend a lot of time reading, and it kind of tends to create this, I will say, false sense that you're very deeply interested in humans and emotions and whatnot, because if you're really interested, you'll be talking to them, not sitting in a room and reading books. But the sense you have is that you want to sort of understand, and if this is a area of work that specializes in people, then that's probably where you want to be. And then I think slowly over time I realized which elements of it were a strength, which element of it were probably things I can do but a lot more slowly, much more at an individual level than at a group level and things like that. So for me, the initial influences were actually some of my early bosses. So I worked with Saskin for a while. The head of HR there, Mr. Hari Iyer, was a big influence, because he was, I think that company, Saskin, as well as him, that was probably my first exposure to the whole idea of first principles thinking, even at a time when first principles thinking was not a cool thing for people to talk about. And I think understanding that even from an HR perspective, it is fundamentally about building systems, building a way of operating that can scale, and that is not just about sort of trying to influence people to do things one way or the other. It is about building a system that can sustain itself and that can enable a certain kind of culture, a certain kind of work ethic, a certain way of scaling. So that I would say would be the first one. The second, Again, Amazon as a company was a huge influence just because of their very, very strong definition of culture.
Yeah.
I did think that I fit in quite perfectly, almost felt like, I had found my tribe there.
Sure.
Because of, again, as an organization, their focus on wanting to do things at scale, wanting to, again, look at things at a first principles level. My various bosses over there, Michaela Kaina, who was somebody I'd worked really closely with. She was my boss for a while, continued to be a great mentor. People in the business leadership team that I worked with, again, very frequently across various roles have been great influences. I will say it's largely the things that have stayed with me have been people who are able to think deeply about a problem, people who've been able to focus as much on the execution as about the ideas, and people for whom the integrity of what they're doing is very, very important. And I think those are kind of the things that have stayed with me.
That's amazing, right? And I think it finally comes down to people. And the people you meet at every single stage, you would have thought that you met the right boss and they've influenced you enough, and suddenly you have to move somewhere else, and suddenly you're like, oh my God, there's something else that I'm actually worthy of learning as well, right? So it's really incredible, and that's why career journeys are long, and it's very rich if you're open to it as well, right?
And I will say that, and that very frequently we develop a lens through which we start looking at all problems, maybe after the 5th or 6th year of working. And I've found that the people who are really able to do well are the ones who can change that lens. So it's both things. One, you have to have a lens because that's where your expertise comes from. But then if you stick with that, then you develop this narrow vision that you're not able to sort of see beyond those blinders that you've got on. So I think that's the other big learning, that's a journey. That's something that you have to consciously sort of stay aware of.
No, that's amazing. I want to come a little closer to the business, right, and the space that you're working in itself. So 10 billion UPI transactions currently in a month, right? What an amazing journey India has taken, and companies like PhonePe have really impacted that journey. And in the next 2 years, this is going to double. That's the projection, right? And from at least the research that we have done very recently, PhonePe has half the market share value, right? In terms of the value of the transactions itself.
Just a bit less than half, but yes.
So essentially, the thing, what makes me very curious is to understand the sense of pride and the reaction that this kind of a milestone creates within an organization, right? How are your people taking to this, and what's the sense within the organization?
It is interesting because I think even when you and I spoke first, it wasn't a company that anybody had heard of. My parents were asking me, what is it that I'm up to, and why can't I just stay with the place where I'm at? And even as we were trying to convince people to join, there was a lot of conversation around why this is a good idea. And again, continuously at that point also for us, the conversation was that there are a bunch of people that you will love working with, and that came through in our initial conversations. And that from there onwards, it is going to be what all of us, hopefully good, competent people, are going to make of this place. And I think especially for people who are completing the 6 years, 7 years, 5 years, I think that's the sense that they're coming in with, that, hey, I was there then, and I took this leap and it played out, and I saw something. A lot of the conversations, so in fact, it's not something that we have proactively done, but a lot of the group conversations we end up having, getting people together, there's this tendency to sort of think back to how things were, and then you look at people who, were probably early in their career 5 years ago, were just sort of taking this risk, were doing something fairly, for the first time and all of that. And now they look back and they look at the size of their teams, they look at the impact that they've been able to make, the kind of experiences and exposures they've had. But it's not like everything that we did worked out. There were a bunch of failures at some point. And so these guys also think back to, oh, at that time I thought this was the end, but look how much further I've gotten because it sort of stuck around and I got another chance. So I think there is a lot of that, that I took a risk, I decided to do something based on some heuristic, some judgment,
Yes.
and it played out.
Right.
And that, I think, is the most powerful feeling that most people have around.
And in startups, it's really uncertain,
Yeah,
right? And every day is a new step. And I really think when you walk in, you don't know how your day is truly going to turn out, right? But that's also the excitement.
Yes.
So it's great, and congratulations on that big milestone. I think it's always nice to see companies actually thriving in this direction, right? It's a lot of hard work in a startup.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
But to actually deal with that also, to get there, I'm sure it didn't come without resilience. And working with that attitude of resilience through a lot of ups and downs, right?
Yeah.
What were some of the organization's HR practices that actually helped you all sort of navigate through it?
Yeah, so it's always a hard thing, because I think especially in the initial stages, so much of what you're doing is not really HR, it is just leadership. Right, so you are making sure that the company is operating with a single focus. The company has a consistent sense of its culture, and everybody is talking the same language.
Sure.
I think about 70% of it is that, and there is some amount of work that needs to be done to make sure people understand what that language is, people understand how that language plays itself out. What are the behaviors that we consistently demonstrate? What are the kind of things that we reward, not necessarily financially, but even in terms of what gets recognized, what gets accepted, and all of that stuff. And so a lot of the, and I'm maybe talking about the initial few years, where a lot of the work was around that component of it. That are all of us on the same page in terms of how this organization operates? Sure. Further down, I would say it became easier, because then you could say we are just going to build this in to the kind of company that we are. We've written down the culture and values that we have. Now they become a part of the performance system that we have. They become part of the development plans that we have. That become part of how we talk about manager capability. We make sure everybody who comes in hears about how we operate. They listen to our stories. Sure. They know what we did and why we did, and why we will continue to do it. So a bunch of that stuff was easier later on, because you could just build it into the systems that you have. But the initial years were a lot more about just having to talk to people, because the systems were simply not at that scale where that could really have the kind of impact.
Yeah, no, I can totally respect that, and it takes years to actually build and integrate it, right? But just on that note, it's been 5 years now, and that's again another milestone to think about, right? I really don't know how you manage your well-being, and some other day I'm very curious to sort of understand that space as well. But tell me, how has the culture sort of evolved? What about the intangibles, right? A lot of times culture is articulated with artifacts or even stating certain values. But what was those things that truly mattered, and how did they sort of evolve?
Yeah, so I think I spoke to you about the things that matter to me as an individual, and the things that I see. And I think the one that was very consistently here at PhonePe from the beginning was integrity. And it did show up, in terms of how we took decisions about who will and how we will grow the organization, what decisions will we take, what will be acceptable and not acceptable, and being very open about that. Being a very transparent company, we continue to have company town halls where we are very transparent about our numbers, about our growth, about our plans for the future. And that sort of then percolates across how the entire company thinks about itself. We also have been very clear that long-term sustainability is the way we are thinking about this, and therefore people are critical. We have been, touch wood, lucky to not be in a place where we have had to ask anybody to leave in the company due to layoffs of any such thing. And I think a part of it has also been the way we think about it, right? Like very frequently that's the easiest decision to take. In some ways, and we've always said that no, that's not the decision we are going to take. We're not going to do that, and we are going to continuously, which means that sometimes we will be short of people, because we will take that much longer to decide about growing the size of the organization from a headcount perspective. We have consistently sort of looked at how we can ensure that people are participating in the wealth creation process, whether it's about sort of those initial years where we just provide bonuses, time when we ensured that even during COVID, there were certain practices that were implemented regardless. The fact that everybody in the company has ESOPs in the company.
Right.
So things that ensure that people can get a sense that we are all in this together, and we are not going to leave people behind just because it's not convenient or
Sure.
any such thing. And that might have some consequences on the other side, but we're more than happy to sort of deal with those. And I think that component of empathy and being able to put people first has been the other thing that has also consistently stayed as the cultural bedrock of the company.
No, that's really nice, because we are more or less in and slowly navigating, hopefully, out of the fact that there are layoffs and there are these decisions one is compelled to take because of the business exigencies. However, I like the fact that you mentioned that you're thinking long term, right? And there are some decisions that you have to not take in order for that to happen, and that is quite unique, because mostly you're sort of restructuring and constantly looking at what your current need is, and you'll have to lay off. But that too is fine. But at the end of the day, I think what I really liked and respected was this, that you have to think 5 steps ahead and take some decisions for later. Right?
Yeah, and I think like what this has meant is that, again, in that height of the peak, we did say that we'll not be able to hire people at this level because we don't think we'll be able to sustain it. We may have lots of work for these people for 6 months, but we wouldn't know what to do with them later, so we will not hire. We will just let that growth come a little bit more slowly. We cannot afford these completely mad salaries, so we will not pay them. We will let these people choose other companies that they might want to work with. So those things were very hard at that time, and it was very difficult to convince people that was the right thing to do. But it did mean that we remained within our constraints, and therefore when things became a little quieter, we really were able to manage, continue to manage.
No, that's great, and that brings me to my next, it's a nice segue that we move to the next question is, how do you know, with the kind of industry it is, fintech is quite volatile, right? And there's so much going on. There's so much skill that needs to be sort of intensified and built as well. How has PhonePe actually looked at future-ready workforce, or really building a skill and giving a skill journey, so to say, to your employees as well?
Yeah, so see, a large part of our we continue to work with the model of you know, core capabilities. The way we think about it is like the profile that we hire for is the craftsperson, which is basically somebody who is focused on building expertise, but then we make them work with other experts in order to come up with a solution that can scale and grow. So you have you know, an expert in insurance working with a product person and an engineering person and a business person, and they're all trying to figure out what's the best way to build out the insurance business, for example. And that necessarily requires that everybody is not only focused on their expertise, but also open enough to think about how these other components can help solve the problem. So you come up, you know, you have a diverse perspective which leads to better solutions, as I sort of say. So what we focus on very frequently is in developing these capabilities. That one, at a functional level, how do you get better? And for that, we don't prescribe. We kind of make it very easy for people to use our learning assistance program to choose whichever learning programs they feel best help them develop and deepen the expertise that they sit with. The second thing that we do is that, and then so therefore outside of that, it's fundamental capabilities like how do you think about problem solving? How do you think about taking judgment calls? How do you build for holistic thinking? So those components become the second element of it. And the third and fourth one are around giving people experiences that stretch them. And then making sure there is a feedback loop that tells them what went well and what did not, so that that can translate into learning.
So Manmeet, one of the things that I have also noticed is that there is no time to learn. And one of the strategies we were considering is going to campuses, getting new folks, right? But then when you look at it, you don't have the time to actually start and groom from the scratch, because the pace is so fast. And every quarter things are changing. So plug and play seems to be an appropriate model, so that people come with the expertise and start contributing from pretty much day one, right? Of course, you'll build an ecosystem to support. So how do we sort of influence mindsets, right? Because people do need to learn, they want to. It's just that they genuinely lack the time to do it, right?
So we have discovered very slowly that actually there is no other answer. So we for example, in engineering, we keep trying to say that, oh, we'll hire a bunch of senior people and whatever. It doesn't happen. You can't find. And so you can't find, and maybe you can find if you again have unlimited funds. We don't. So that necessarily means that you have to make a choice. What we also find is that when people come in from the outside into this environment, which is so agile and has so much going on in terms of change, it's also very hard for them to figure out how to operate successfully. So even though it seems slower to grow people internally, it actually is faster. Because making sure, and so we did end up having a fairly structured, we called it the PhonePe University, where we, about, I think now it's been 3 years, where we realized that if we have to grow engineers, and we started with engineers and we moved on to kind of follow the same model, at least on the technical side. But if we have to grow them, then it seems like a lot of work, but actually ensuring mentorship, project work, structured opportunity is really the only way to do it. There really is no other way.
I could not agree more. We just have to keep nudging the business to understand this, right? And if you want to build a high performance culture, it does come along with your ability to learn something beyond as well. So I think it's a journey.
Absolutely.
That's something that we have to accept.
I will say that it's harder on the engineering side. In some of the other areas, it just, like you, again, balance of what talent availability versus needs, etc. also plays out. So we are able to get folks in, and sometimes you just have to, right? Like if you're going to start a business about which you know nothing, you have to get the experts in. So that's
absolutely. I think we have to find ways to sort of get them to sort of take time and then, you know, build those newer skills as well. So just, you know, for me, I was also curious to move to another topic, Manmeet, where we spend some time to understand your perspectives, and because you've done so much work globally as well in the space of D&I, what they call as DEI today, of course. How has it evolved in your view in the last decade particularly, right?
So it is interesting because so at Amazon, it was, and it's been a long while ago actually. How long? So it's 6, 7 years, 8 years, I think. 8 years, So the way the conversation started, and I was not there at the time in that discussion, was that the SVP for international business were going through their talent management process, and he was like, I don't understand why there are no women in my succession planning board. It makes no sense. And so we started going from there onwards to look at the problem. And in the Amazon style, it was a very technical paper with a lot of data, with a lot of understanding of what's kind of moving where. And my reaction when I was asked to take it up was that I don't think women need anything special. And I think it was that journey of going through that data, going through lived experiences to figure out that, you know, the world is not an equal place, and a bunch of us very frequently have privilege that we maybe do not recognize, and what you lose in that process is really that opportunity to create something that is truly based on merit, and capability and potential is getting wasted if you do not create an environment that allows for a more equitable distribution of opportunity. So whatever you can do for that is really where the effort has to be, and there are different ways of kind of looking at it. And now in the last few years there's been so much more research around all of this that you know, it is about how a system is set up. A little while ago we were talking about offices and air conditioning. Like if you're physically not comfortable, maybe your productivity is not going to be that high, and everything else from there onwards, right? Like how desks might be set up, how work days might be designed. Everything goes into what might work very effectively for one set of people and may in fact make it a much harder for another set of people to be successful. And it could be anything, right? It could be gender, it could be your skin color, it could be race, it could be caste, religion, any of those things. Anything that can possibly be a systemic way that limits you to a particular type versus being an individual is really where that disconnect is. And the more we are able to remove those layers around a person and see them for the set of capabilities that they bring, the better.
So, no, that's absolutely true. And just for the benefit of the audience, what we were discussing is that women get 2 degrees colder faster in offices, and there's always a cold atmosphere around you, and people don't know these things. They don't know the biology, and we've not been taught. It's a beautiful book, right, called Invisible Women. So it tells you what data is not there. So it's quite fascinating that so many things have been missed out. Very basic things have been missed out.
Absolutely.
But just on that spirit of innovation itself, technology is really, really, I think, what is being discussed now. It's transformed our lives, right, at the end of the day. I want to get closer home to, you know, the fact that we're digital companies, and HR is our playing ground. And what has been that journey to adopt HR technology within you know, PhonePe? How has it transformed you all?
So we were, because we are a tech first company, I think continuing to leverage technology for HR was definitely one of the things that I wanted to be able to do. I did not think it would be all that hard. It has been super complicated. The way we thought of it was, the vision that we are sort of moving towards is that the more we can enable managers to effectively manage their people, and the more we can enable people to manage their own careers and their own development, the less do you need the HR team to necessarily be this huge police force that is trying to tell everybody what to do. And if we have to do that effectively, we have to have good data, we have to have the right systems, we have to have the right nudges to enable all of those things. So that was what we started with. But when we started as a company, we were working off of the Flipkart systems because they had very kindly offered to let us use their infrastructure until we figured out where we wanted to be ourselves. So the journey started with sort of saying, okay, let's sort of try and bring this back inside. So we know what are the kind of challenges that will come up and we can start solving for them. So we started with leveraging Darwinbox initially, and they were great in terms of being able to give us what we needed at that size. We were maybe about 1,000 people. And they were great partners, worked out really well for a while. But then I think we realized we wanted to do a whole lot of other things, whole lot of complicated things. So we had to then move to a larger scale system, which ended up being SuccessFactors. And then on top of that, we are now in the process of building out the solutions that we want. Most of the solutions that we are now in the process of building are customized solutions. We have people in HR working closely with the PhonePe engineering team, people working with external partners. But the focus is the same. The focus is to say what will first simplify life for any employee. And there having our internal engineers works really nicely because they have opinions and they're like, this is what we need and this is what we do not need, and therefore this is what we'll build. So there is that part of it, and then there is you know, developing employee capability, developing manager capability, ensuring good feedback is coming to people. How does that feedback come together in a way that makes the most sense to you, can translate into the right next opportunity for you. Those are all of the components that we are in the middle of figuring out, so that ultimately we can get to a place where if you're a PhonePe employee, you know exactly know exactly all the 5 million journeys that you can take towards the career path that you might want to take, and have the learning experiences and the opportunities there, and a manager who is also equipped and enabled to tell you exactly what feedback, what support do you need to make that happen.
So nice, and it's actually unenviable, right? It takes a long time to figure the whole ecosystem, and what I enjoy most about you know, the experience that technology gives and platforms give you is that you don't have to be in the workspace. It's coming to you wherever you are, right? So that's another way to actually take your organization to the person. And it's actually a wonderful space, and there's a lot going on in the market as well in terms of HR tech, right? It's pretty cool. So just how HR technology has impacted the white collar space so beautifully over the last decade particularly. What we are also seeing, and because we work in the space of frontline you know, development, frontline workforce, which is so large just in India alone, is that HR technology can actually make a big difference to, you know, bringing them into society a lot more, raising equity for them or equitability for them, and then you're creating an ecosystem where people have access to greater financial support, greater number of jobs that they can actually access, greater learning as well, right? All of this is transformational for that group. Now, PhonePe also has a significant, I think, population of frontline workforce that's supporting your business. How impactful have they been? How have they helped transform your journey as an organization?
Yes. So, I mean, I fundamentally believe that a large part of the success of the organization is because of our frontline force. People did not know who PhonePe was until we were actually available as in every shop. And the fact that we were available in every shop was thanks entirely to our frontline workforce. So I think I do believe that the frontline workforce is one of the core advantages for us at PhonePe, and continuing to ensure that they see value in this organization and they continue to grow with us is actually fairly critical to us.
Because the compliances are, the labor law is the way it is, and we're so restricted by compliance as well, right? Has PhonePe been able, and I know, Manmeet, that you've told me that there's some part of it which is a contract labor through another vendor, some of them are directly at contract with you. Have you been able to extend development for them? Have you been able to extend certain benefits for them as well?
Yeah, so what we do is that, of course, we make sure that our core, our table stakes are at all levels of compliance. So we have been very, very consistent in making sure that there are from a compensation perspective, from a benefits perspective, from an insurance perspective, everything is taken care of. As and when we need to, we go beyond. But what we also do is that we have managed to, because the organization has been growing the way it has, and with 10,000 FTE workforce, what we've been able to do is to ensure that we are able to transition people into other roles that allows for growth. And that sort of helps significantly. So we have multiple kinds of roles. So you work with what we call the mass offline retail, you work with SMEs, you work with large enterprises. As someone who might have started off as frontline worker, you can grow into a people manager. So there are all of those opportunities, and I think I will say that the biggest advantage we've been able to offer has really been that there is this opportunity to get into a career path, and if you don't want to be a manager, then there are multiple different types of sales roles that you can get into, which require progressively higher degree of skill set. You work with more nuanced customers, and now for a while the work that we had for our frontline workforce was largely to just go to retailers and have them use PhonePe as a service, which was no cost, that doesn't require much. That person says, yeah, sure. You're not costing me anything, I'll go ahead and do it. But then as the system has evolved, as we have gotten into electronic devices, as we have gotten into multiple value-added services for our merchants, then there is a little bit more of an evolved negotiation and influencing that folks have to do. And from there onwards, moving into, again, people management, working with more complex merchants, all of that sort of also continues to come in, and that's been where a lot of that has come in from. And then, of course, everybody, as I mentioned, as people continue to grow, we make sure that the PhonePe benefits, the PhonePe standards apply to folks once they're sort of part of that particular
I think
journey.
That's simply amazing, because one of the key things that, as I talk to a lot of our clients and just the industry at large, right, there are more problems than solutions, and a lot of organizations haven't leaned into, and they can't, because the contract labor law is such that you cannot extend a lot of things that you would have probably to your own folks, right? And another interesting thing is, do you really need the last mile delivery person who's so critical to your business? Should they actually be on contract at all? So a lot of interesting views which are very varied. So who is an employee? Why should they be not your employee, right? Some fundamental questions as well. But it's very heartening to hear what you're saying, that there are a lot of different things that are actually touching your workforce, that truly the workforce that matters to you as well, right? And as we get closer to the last part of our session today, I'm also curious to know that this is a population that's actually distributed pretty much on the field, and I think very, very high attrition, a lot, right? They come in through references largely, and they're getting digitally equipped. They have been, particularly after Aadhaar and the mobile revolution in India, right? How does PhonePe engage with them? Are you doing it through digital platforms? What are your methods?
Yeah, so we do use a technology platform, but I will say that there is a lot more that we can do over there.
Sure.
The investments, so we're using technology, we're using folks to be able to make sure that they are aware of what's happening in the company, they are aware of what their work days need to look like, but I think there's definitely a lot more for us to be able to do in that space.
Yeah, no, that's great. We are hearing of digital apps like WhatsApp, where everybody's on the same platform, and let's say you're in a factory, and this is a true example where your hierarchy is gone, because if there's a fatality or an incident, a crisis, your top leader and the worker are on the same platform talking, and suddenly it's a real-time information that's flowing, right? Because it's so distributed, you don't know, you can't always go through the rung of hierarchy, right? So it's very beautiful what tech is actually doing to people who actually you may not always get a chance to meet, right? So that's amazing. So thanks for your views, Manmeet. I want to move to the last section, and we had talked about this. This is a rapid fire session. So there are a few questions that either require just one word or one sentence. So shall we move into that?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So I have just a few, so I will, start shooting them at you. Diversity or inclusion, woke or not?
Like I said, I have arrived at this answer at a complicated this thing, not a one-word answer, but neither and both. I'm woke. If you think it's uncool to be woke, then I'm definitely woke. If you think it's uncool to be non-woke, then I'm definitely non-woke.
I think this is a very challenging question, I must say. If you asked me this, I don't know what I would have actually answered, because both are controversial, right? Okay, so we'll move to the second one, which is most challenging part of HR in a high-growth fintech organization.
I think it's developing managers, because everything else depends on the managers.
Yeah, I could not agree more. The one-to-many relationship owners, this is like a mantra every day here as well, right? But it takes time. Favorite part of HR?
The favorite part of our HR definitely is the organization design and structure conversations that help you figure out where the company should be going, and which also is very startup-y in the fact that you're changing it all the time.
Yeah. Advice to aspiring HR. Aspiring HR leaders or HR professionals?
I would say lean into the business, figure out what are the problems that really need to be solved.
Yeah, no, perfect. Top skill every HR person should have?
Influencing. Figuring out what your stakeholders need and how best to give it to them in a way that is long-term sustainable.
Wow. Why most workers complain about their jobs?
Because we deal with jobs transactionally. We don't go beyond. We are too busy to go beyond what is truly important.
Yeah, and the minute you're passionate about it, it's a very different experience, right? It's quite transformational for the self as well if you go that distance as well. Biggest employee engagement concern?
I think the same thing, that work gets too transactional.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. And the last one is, what does it take to be a CHRO?
Resilience.
So just on that beautiful note and a reality we both share, I think, being a part of growing organizations, thank you so much. It was really, really nice listening to you, and thanks for all the honest inputs. I love to, it was great to listen to how PhonePe has grown, how your people feel, as well as what impact you have actually driven in the organization. It truly is a humbling experience being in a startup. So it was a pleasure to see you and have you here, Manmeet.
Thank you, Mohana. You were a wonderful host. It was great having this conversation with you. Thank you so much.